Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavai Tejasvinavaditamastu ma vidvishavai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman protect us. May he guide us and give us strength and right understanding. May love and harmony be with us all. Peace, peace, peace. And good evening. We're continuing our reading of a couple of lectures on education by Swami Abhedananda, one of the direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, who spent 25 years in the West. And these lectures were given when he returned to India. So Atma's here to help us do some of the reading. Why don't you go ahead and start? This is the very end of the lecture we started a couple of weeks ago, called The Ideal of Education.
If you see a poor man, make him stand on his own legs. Give him the proper opportunity. Do not tyrannize over him. Do not call him names. And do not condemn him. But love him as you love your own self. Do you give such instruction in your schools and colleges? If you do, you are worthy of the place you are occupying. If you try to bring that out in your system of education, the world will bow down to you. The Lord will be pleased that you have worshipped him in spirit and also in the form of human beings. Where shall we find God if we leave all men out? God is not sitting above the clouds. He's here. Him I see in your faces. He is the Virat Purusha. The Lord is with infinite eyes, with infinite number of ears, with infinite hands, and infinite feet. He sees through all eyes, hears through all ears, works through all hands, and thinks through all minds. The collective spiritual being is the Lord. And so long as you separate individuals from the whole, you destroy the relation between the individual and the universe, between man and God. Therefore, my friends, we should learn to see God in man and woman and love them, worship them, feed them, and educate them. Women should have equal rights and privileges with men. That should be the ideal. And then the highest perfection which is latent in each soul, and which is described in all the scriptures of the world, will be realized, and such is the object of ideal education. Education should not degrade man or woman. It should not be for money-making, but it should be the culture of the soul for the good of all. And that soul culture will bring in perfection as its ideal, and the whole world will be benefited by such education. I wish to see that day when India will have the privilege of imparting such ideal education in and through all colleges and schools, both high and primary. Then the plan of the Lord of the universe will be fulfilled, and then we shall enjoy peace and happiness in this world and hereafter.
Yes, and that ends that particular chapter. Of course, it's interesting to remember that Swami Abhedananda would have been in this country when the women finally got the right to vote. So he would certainly be highly aware of those kinds of issues and would be hopeful that India would follow suit. Of course, Sister Nivedita had been working in India for the education of women in a wonderful way to educate the women of India. And nowadays, I think they've done a wonderful job in that respect. So, of course, the ideal of education, as he emphasizes over and over, is not just for money making, but for building of the spirit, building of the character of the individual. And that's what is the most important part of education. So our next chapter is called Practical Education, and I edited this a bit because this was given at a similar time but at a different place, so we repeated many of the things that we just read, so we don't need to repeat them again ourselves. So I've edited this, and this was delivered at Kuala Lumpur in 1921. And he addresses the group, Mr. Chairman, sisters and brothers of Kuala Lumpur. I am very pleased to be present on this occasion. Then continuing on a little later, he says, do you know the meaning of the mother tongue? It is the language which the child inherits from its mother, not only after its birth, but also before it was born, during the prenatal condition of the mother. Whatever thoughts and ideas the mother may have during that period, the child inherits them. These ideas the child learns to think in the tongue which the mother speaks. You must remember that all thoughts cannot be expressed unless we use words. Words are absolutely necessary in thinking. For instance, if you think of the table, you will have to repeat the word table, table, before your mind. There is a relationship between thought and words. The science of language tells us that here lies the secret of the thinking power of the child. The child must think in words. And which are the words that are most convenient for the child to utter? The words which it learns from its mother, and not in a foreign tongue, because the brain cells and the whole nervous system of the child is trained by the mother. This happens not after the birth, but from the prenatal days before the birth. Therefore, our mother tongue stands out as the first language. You must not neglect that. So that's an interesting idea that he has. And there is, of course, this is over about 100 years ago that he was speaking. So I'm sure there's more research done, but there is evidence that the child begins to pick up things in the womb from the mother, and that the sound of the mother's voice, or the music that it hears, and that sort of thing, are things that become entrained in the baby before the baby's even born. So he was really on top of things when to understand those kinds of things. He was also is also fairly well established that if you learn a second language before about the age of 5 or 6, that it's fairly easy. And if after that, between about 6 and about 12, it's not too difficult, but after that, it's very difficult to not have an accent and to learn a second language. But when you think about it, obviously animals are thinking, and they're not thinking in words. So there must be some thought processes that take place without words, but certainly our experience is that when we think, we're thinking in words. Everything seems to be word-based when we're cogitating things. And yet, sometimes I think some people think they think in pictures. I think that's an idea that is gaining some credence, that some people think better in pictures. Einstein said he thought better in pictures. In fact, there was a certain area of his brain that was enlarged, and another area that hadn't developed, that indicated that he did a lot of his thinking in pictures. So, do you want to read a little bit?
What is the object of education? The object of education is to enable a person properly to stand on his feet and understand the laws of nature. To understand not only the ordinary law of physical nature, but the mental, intellectual, moral, and spiritual nature. If you cannot think, you're not able to express your thoughts in words. You see, our great Lord Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna was absolutely original. He never went to any school or college because he did not want to be a phonographer for the people's thoughts. When you study a book, your mind absorbs the thoughts of the writer. And you must know that these thoughts are only suggestions which help you to think in that line. We do not gain any knowledge from outside. Knowledge cannot be poured from outside into the brain of a child. Books help us to acquire suggestions, which are like pebbles thrown into a pool. They create ripples and react. So when a suggestion is thrown into a child's mind, it begins to react. And in that reaction, the child gathers what is called knowledge. Knowledge comes from within. Our soul is a part of the infinite. Our soul is all-knowing. All knowledge is already buried within us, and we do not know how to bring it out. You are making a mistake by giving the suggestion in a foreign tongue, which will not create the reaction so quickly as if you would if you gave suggestion in your mother tongue.
Yeah, I think there was he's probably arguing against teaching in an English medium in India, I think is what his point was here in this particular part. Let's see, there was something else I was going to say. It's escaping my mind here. Oh, yeah, he's talking about how when you read a book, you absorb the thoughts of the writer, and then you need to sort of make those your own. And sometimes we don't take the time to do that. We get an idea, but we don't actually give ourselves, or perhaps the teacher doesn't give the student time to absorb a particular thought or idea. So that's an important idea to remember, is that sometimes we need to be with an idea and kind of make it our own in order for it to really sink in. That you've gotten these ripples in the waves of your mind from reading a particular book or hearing a lecture or something of that nature. And it's good for the teacher to pause every once in a while, perhaps even repeat something just to make sure that this idea has had time to sink in before you go on to something else. There's a misprint down here in this next one. I should have said that there is the kindergarten, not Dindergarten.
Did he say internet too? Was
No.
word internet mentioned?
No.
You want me to read?
You want to read? Okay.
There is the kindergarten system of America. The mind of the child is consulted before they give any education to the child. In a kindergarten school, different things are kept. For instance, clay, pencils, slates. There are pictures, blocks of letters, and the children are brought into the room and are asked what they would like to make. Whether a figure of a cat, a snake, or something like it. That is the test. And that test is set before they give any instruction. If the child has any inclination of drawing, it must be developed in that line. If for music, that must be his line. That system should be introduced into our kindergarten schools. The education that you get in the English schools is not the right kind of education. I've thought about this great problem. We do not want to nationalize ourselves. We do not want to neglect our mother tongue. But still, we must have education. For this end, I have made up my mind to have in Calcutta an institute for practical instruction, where there may not only the development of the body, mind, and intellect, but where they may grow up and become spiritual giants. As I've already stated, you do not understand the value of education and the value of environment. You do not know anything about yourselves. You do not know how you should eat, what food is necessary for the growth of the body. You do not know what food will develop your thoughts, your brain, your muscles, your bones, and your nervous system. You eat at random because you do not know better. You think that a lot of chili will stimulate your brain, but you do not know that thereby you're ruining your stomach. You do not know practical chemistry and the results of food analysis. Study chemistry, practical chemistry, in which all the foodstuffs are analyzed to their proper elements.
Okay, let's take a pause here because we're getting into a whole other topic here. I don't have any information about whether he actually was able to start that educational institution or not. That would be interesting to find out. But certainly the kindergarten system started in Germany, and kindergarten literally means the child developing a garden developing a child, or an environment to grow a child. And so it was becoming popular in the United States, obviously, when he was lecturing over here. So whatever kindergarten schools he visited, he was impressed with. Now, as far as the food stuff goes, he's going to get into a discussion of the importance of proper eating and how it depends on the individual. I remember years ago I read a book called Biochemical Individuality. I remember it had this cartoon figure of a face with 3 eyes, and I don't think they were referring to the third eye. The idea was that our bodies are really very different, and it listed test after test after test of what happens when you feed different nutrients to different people. And so they would say, give people a particular diet with so much calcium in it. And then they would measure how much calcium it would take before the person started excreting extra calcium, that they'd had enough calcium. And it varied a lot. It wasn't like 10% different. It was like 2 or 3 times difference. And this was similar over a wide number of kinds of nutrients. So people's bodies are very different, and what they can absorb and utilize varies a lot from person to person. And so that's why I think you find so much variety as to what people recommend as far as diet goes. There is no end to the number of things that you find, especially nowadays on the internet, where you can go on and find all sorts of things on the internet. People's different ideas of a diet. Try this diet. Now, not just for losing weight, but for, good health or for gaining muscle or whatever it is. You can find all sorts of different ideas, different people's opinions, and that's probably because different people's systems are different. You can find people touting the benefits of certain foods like goji berries, and then you'll find another person saying, yes, goji berries have antioxidants, but they've also got lectins in it or something that aren't good for you, and so don't eat them. And then you'll find that somebody's saying, well, soy is the ideal protein, and someone else saying, no, soy is not the ideal protein. And it goes on and on and on, endless arguments about food. So anyway, we'll continue, and he's going to give us a few ideas about his ideas about food, which may or may not be relevant to us.
Okay.
Do you want to continue? Or do you
Okay.
Yeah.
You do not know?
Yeah, you do not know practical chemistry?
You do not know what chemical elements are necessary for the growth of the body, or what amount of acid is secreted by the stomach for digestive purpose. If you take such food as will stop the secretion of the stomach, then you will have indigestion. If you increase the secretion of the gastric juice in the stomach, then you will have a false appetite. That is another disease. You will have a desire to eat at all times. That is a disease from which great many people suffer. That is why it is absolutely necessary to have a practical education. You know nothing about your body or how to keep it well or how to protect it from the germs or diseases. You do not know what kind of water to drink and from what vessel. I've noticed that you do not clean the metal vessels from which you drink. They must be cleaned every time and must be well polished so that no dirt can remain. Cleanliness is next to godliness. Water contains germs. This knowledge can be gained only from physical education, practical education, and this should be taught to our boys and girls. Hygiene must be taught to them. Get a food chart and have it hung in the school. It will give details of the chemical elements of all kinds of food. Rice is the best food. It has all the qualities for the growth of the body, mind, and brain. It has everything, but rice must be unpolished. Polishing should not be done. Polished rice is not good and should not be eaten because the polishing process takes away the vitamins of the rice. The Japanese people ate polished rice and they got the terrible disease called beriberi. The eating of rice will make the growth of your hair perfect. And those who do not eat rice gradually become bald-headed.
Must be my whole problem.
Or lose their hair. If you imitate the English diet and the English method of eating, you will soon find that your digestive system is not fit to digest meat. You will get sick. Your stomach is not trained to eat beef and pork. You've inherited your diet, your tastes, and your stomachs from your forefathers. If you discard that diet, you will get sick and contract diseases.
Yeah, so I think that's a good point, that people's genetic background and the heritage that they come from has a big difference in what they can eat. If you come from a certain particular racial stock that grew up in a particular part of the globe, your body has probably had 10,000 years of evolution to adjust to a particular kind of diet. So while some advice is probably very good, and all diets could probably be improved, there's probably not one diet that's good for everyone. And he's touting the advantages of rice, but I've also heard other people say, well, the protein of rice isn't really all that great. But it's a staple of a huge number of people, and obviously a huge percentage of the world's population has gotten very used to getting along on rice. Of course, this was also a big issue back in his day, where they were discovering that polishing rice and using white wheat and so forth, the refined grains, were taking out nutrients that people needed, and they were discovering all these nutritional deficiencies. That was the era when all the different vitamin deficiency diseases were becoming known. And so this was again been a hot topic. Again, he just spent 25 years in the West, and so then coming back to Malaysia and India, where he was talking, he would have wanted them to know that good hygiene is very important, because this wouldn't have been as common to them. And as the people were getting more crowded and moving into cities away from the villages, these would have been much more important aspects to get across to them, that they were going to have to start thinking about hygiene, because you start living in cities, you start getting a lot more problems with hygiene. So these issues would have been very much in his mind and very important to the people that he was speaking to. So you can see why he's emphasizing these things. Let's see, what else? Oh yeah, I often think of, the Eskimos, for example. Probably for 10 to 20,000 years, they've been living in a very cold climate where you're not going to have fruits and vegetables, you're not going to have grains available. And so their whole diet is largely from animal proteins, and that's what their bodies are suited for. If your heritage comes from places like Scandinavia or far northern Europe, where it's snow for 6 months out of the year, and you're not going to be able to go out and harvest fruits, vegetables, and nuts, you can keep some nuts around, and you can keep some preserves and so forth, but a lot of fresh things are simply not going to be available. And so your digestive system is going to have adjusted to that from the last 10,000 years of your ancestors. If you're lucky to be from Southern European ancestry or from a tropical area, then your body's going to be very different. And you'll have a different kind of constitution. Let's see, what else? I think we're ready to go on. Do you want me to read, or do you want to read some more? Want me to read?
No, go ahead.
You're going to go ahead, okay?
My friends, you are living in a land from where you cannot see the great changes going on in the outside world. The changes are all based upon the fundamental principles of education, which we have inherited from our ancient rishis. Another thing must I tell you, that it is necessary for us to learn what are the requirements of the body.
Mind, it says here. Oh, I'm sorry. No, you're right. I skipped a line.
What are the requirements of the mind? Our education must not only help us to know ourselves physically, mentally, and spiritually, but it must also help to understand our environments. You do not understand why seasons come and go. You do not know what is the relation of the Earth to the solar system. You ought to know the relations of the planets, and some elementary knowledge of astronomy should be imparted to the boys and girls, as for instance, that the Earth is rotating around its axis. The rising and setting of the sun should be told in a story form. The sun is so far away that it looks to us like a small disk. It is 93 millions of miles away. The light takes 9 minutes to come from the sun to the Earth, traveling at the rate of 186,000 miles per second. Think of the distance of these stars, which are so far away. Some of them are bigger than our sun. The light traveling from these stars takes years to reach the Earth. In the meantime, the planets might have been destroyed, but still we see the light. When you see a star, you are looking at a thing that was a star in the past. You must not think that it is just as you see it now, but just as it was when the light started to travel from the star, say 50 years ago. Can you imagine that? You do not see what is at present, but what it was 100 or 1,000 years ago.
Yeah, so that was some of the favorite things that John Dobson would tell people when they were looking through the telescopes. And so as the sidewalk astronomers go out and show people Jupiter, we'll remind them that you're not seeing Jupiter now, you're seeing it 40 minutes ago. And Saturn you're seeing maybe an hour and a half ago. The moon you're seeing 1 1/3 seconds ago. When you hear some of those old newscasts of the people that went to the moon and they were talking to the person on the moon, they always sound like they're a little stupid or maybe half asleep. You know, there's this long delay. They'll say something and then there's this long delay and then they finally answer. Well, that's of course it's because the signal is taking 1 1/3 seconds to get there and another 1 1/3 seconds to get back. And so you've got this delay in your conversation that's going on. It's also, you have to keep that in mind when they send these probes up to Mars. They can't just tell it instantly what to do. It takes several minutes for the information to get to the spacecraft. So if the information coming from the spacecraft might take a few minutes to get back to Earth, and if they see that there's something wrong, then they have to send a message knowing that it's going to be another couple minutes before it gets the signal. So to think of how complicated that is and how amazing it is that the scientists are able to adjust for all of that is really incredible. But I think it really is an amazing thing to contemplate the nature of this universe, how we don't see anything now, we see it all in the past. Our normal experience is that it seems like now, because it's such a tiny time difference between.
In fact, what we're talking about is 30 seconds
Oh, it is.
in the future. They take 30 seconds
it takes
for
30
this.
seconds for YouTube
So
to get it up
whoever
there.
is watching is actually watching the past.
Right.
And here.
This is a historical document you're watching. So yeah. So we see everything away from us in space by the trick of seeing it backwards in time. Or we see it backwards in time by the trick of seeing it away from us in space, depending on how you look at it. And that reminds us that really we are all one, that this idea of separation is some sort of trick of Maya. Maya has us under this spell that we see everything out there and away from us in space, but we do that by seeing it backward in time. And so in actuality, if you think in 4D, if you think in 4D space-time, everything is here and now. And of course, when you look at some of the meditation techniques, you're advised to think of everything in the now, to think of the yourself in the now. What is the now? What is the here and now? And think of everything within you. As he said, you are the infinite. You can either think of yourself as part of the infinite or as the infinite. But you are that infinitude, and everything is within you. All right, so let's see if we can continue here.
Okay. This is rather a revelation to you, but these are the things you have to learn. Then you will be able to get a clear idea of what the world is like. You're thinking of the Creator? Where is He? We're told of the heavens. Where is it? Where is heaven? It is but a mental state. You go on living on this physical plane. It is just as when you go to sleep and have a dream. You see certain things in a dream. Do you know where you see those dreams? Is it in the external space? No, it is in the mental space. You must think of these truths and realize them. Then your life will be worth living. To do a little clerical work is not the ideal of life. If you want to stand on your feet and enjoy your freedom, you must be independent. Manufacture something and invent something, just as they do in England. There they do not want to be clerks, they want to be independent. That idea of self-help we have lost. That is the greatest degeneration which we are going through now. Unless we reform ourselves and develop our self-culture, no one can help us. And God cannot help you unless you help yourselves. All education must be in harmony with common sense. It is the best sense that God has given us. It is the divine wisdom. It will be the Brahmajnana when it is developed to the knowledge of the Brahman, the infinite being. Do not accept blindly the doctrines and dogmas which you hear. They appeal to your reason, and if they are beneficial to you and your fellow beings, then accept them. This is the true ideal of education. It will help you individually to develop your buddhi, intelligence, and grasp the fundamental principles of life and death, which is the result of the highest education.
Yeah, so this was fairly typical back then, that the educated youth of India were training to be clerks in the English, the British governmental system, and so he's arguing against that. Let's see, there was something else I wanted to say. Oh yeah, he's talking about the blindly accepting doctrines and dogmas. That's a really important point, I think, that too often we get what's called into a paradigm. We think in terms of a particular way of thinking. We get our particular mindset as to how the world is, and so we put everything into that package. All the information we get tends to get filtered and processed in a way that conforms with whatever idea we have about the universe to begin with. So, and this ties into something that he was speaking about earlier, about language too. The language that a people uses, in some sense, confines their thinking. And there have been linguists study that kind of thing as to how language affects the way a people think, the kinds of things they recognize, the kinds of things they think are important, and the kinds of ideas they are able to process easily. So you find that certain languages are just easier for that. For example, Sanskrit's very good for philosophy. English does tend to be very rich and good for science. So these are things that are important. We have to realize that our language actually does tend to box us in sometimes into a particular worldview. And that worldview, or that paradigm that we have, influences how we process information. And this is true of religion as well. If you're in a particular religious sect, you begin to see the world through the eyes of that sect. You see things in terms of the kinds of doctrines and dogmas that are being taught by your particular religious tradition. And in some ways that's very good. You have to have some sort of model by which to live. But we also want to be open to things that might not fit that paradigm. If you run across things that don't fit into the paradigm, you have to be open enough to think that, well, maybe there's something that needs a little shifting here. Great scientific discoveries are made when we make paradigm shifts, when you come across a new way of looking at the universe. For centuries, the European mind was sort of stuck in the Christian theology and had that kind of worldview. Newton, even though he wrote a lot on theology, really kind of broke that down in some sense. And then some of the other scientific discoveries of the Enlightenment age also started to break that down. And so they had to come up with new paradigms and new ways of thinking. And then Einstein's paradigms made another whole shift. Quantum mechanics has made another whole shift. So these paradigm shifts take place, and we have to adjust our thinking. I think those are important things to remember, and I think that's what he's saying here, is that do not blindly accept doctrines and dogmas which you hear. You have to understand that while it's good to have a paradigm in order to do some thinking, it's also good to be able to shift that paradigm if there's a lot of evidence that comes in that doesn't necessarily fit. This is why also we're advised to keep an open mind about our spiritual experiences, and why we don't necessarily talk about any kind of spiritual realization. I've had this realization and it was like this. That tends to box people into thinking that if they have a spiritual experience, it has to be just identical to somebody else's spiritual experience, which isn't necessarily the case. The spiritual experiences come in a wide variety of packages. Ken Wilber has actually kind of analyzed that and gone through a whole sort of grid of ways people experience the divine, and kind of analyze that as a different kinds of paradigms that people might have spiritual experiences in. We don't have too much, and we started a little late, so let's just go ahead and finish this.
This is explained.
Mm-hmm.
This is explained in the Vedas. We, the Hindu people, have always longed for knowledge. Long before the British government had built schools in India, we had our village schools, our pathashalas, our high schools for Sanskrit and other places of education. In almost all villages we had schools. These schools imparted knowledge in different branches of learning science, philosophy, and moral and spiritual laws were taught. All these different branches the parents must learn first. By the education of children, we give the greatest help to mankind. Therefore, Vidya is the highest thing. We worship Saraswati, the goddess of wisdom. There are two kinds of Vidya, Paravidya and Aparavidya. Paravidya is the highest knowledge which can be gained. Aparavidya is the knowledge of this world, which, as I've already described, is the knowledge of the laws which govern our bodies and mind, and which help us to understand our environments. Paravidya is the highest wisdom, the knowledge of the infinite, which enables us to know that the world is only a playground where we live only for a time. Our highest ideal is to know who we are, what we are, why we have come to this world, why we go, and where we go after death. These are the most important questions. Prepare your children by giving them some education. They will then not only be thankful to you, but they will be able to understand their own physical conditions and the laws which govern their life on this material plane, and also the moral and spiritual laws which will ultimately lead to the benefit of mankind and the attainment of God consciousness. This is the goal of all education. Whether you learn English or any other language, you must remember the highest ideal of all education is the attainment of God consciousness. Then, and then only, you will realize that we are children of the immortal bliss. Then, and then only, we shall gain the happiness in this world. And after death, we shall enter the abode of supreme happiness, eternal bliss, and everlasting life.
Very good. And even though I know there are many difficulties with the British ruling India, but I'm very grateful that Vivekananda and Abhedananda and all the direct disciples knew English and could write in English and give us all this knowledge in the language that is our mother tongue, so that we can actually understand these things. I remember Swami, what was his name? I'm forgetting it, but anyway, the one that started the Institute of Culture. They had a conference, and he pointed out that we have this new Veda in English now, and that we can read it in our native tongues. So I think that's a wonderful thing. Now next week we'll read some information about the Mother Goddess and Durga, because we'll be starting the Durga Puja season in about a week and a half. So join us again next Friday for that. And we'll close with a chant. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Filled with Brahman are the things we see. Filled with Brahman are the things we see not. From out of Brahman floweth all that is. From Brahman all, yet is it still the same. Peace, peace.